Hello, very good morning to you. It's just gone 6:30. You're watching Sunrise here on Sky News. On the way, we'll have a look through today's newspapers in the company of John Nichol and Dalia Gebrial. You can come out from behind the sofa now. That is frightening.
Shocking.
Also, what's more shocking is how many cameras that laundry has, more than we've got here in the studio. But we've got enough to do the paper review. With us this morning, environmentalist Dalia Gebrial and the author John Nichol. Good morning.
Good morning.
To you both. Now, Dalia, you're going to kick us off with events in North Korea, their missile test over the weekend and all the reaction and the fallout over the last 24 hours. This is in the Daily Mail.
Yes, so what we're seeing is a real escalation of rhetoric now when it comes to North Korea. We're seeing a lot of threats from Donald Trump, and we're seeing a response to that from the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. And I think, for me, what is very stunning about this is how flippant all of the rhetoric seems to be. We're seeing this rise of Twitter diplomacy, in a sense, with Donald Trump. And I think when we're thinking about nuclear weapons, we're talking about potentially tens of millions of people losing their lives. And I think it's very important that we don't make these kinds of flippant threats. And particularly a lot of talk around this idea that diplomacy, in a sense, doesn't work with North Korea. Donald Trump says the North Koreans only understand one thing. But actually, when you look historically, things like the 1994 Framework Declaration on North Korea did see a de-escalation on aggression and moves towards disarming North Korea when when deals were sort of made to stop aggression on the South Korean border. So we really do see these escalations of these kinds of threats when we see escalation of military rhetoric. And I think that it's very important that we kind of try and dial down and look at this much more soberly than we've been looking at it so far. It seems to play very well politically, but in the long term, I think it's a very dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, John, I don't know what you make of the rhetoric. It seems that it was tempered down slightly over the weekend. The US Secretary of Defence was saying that there would be a massive military response, but they would pull back from the total annihilation. Nobody wants that. When President Trump was asked if the USA would attack North Korea, he said, "We'll see."
I think, look, we know what Mr. Trump does. We know what President Trump does. This is how he reacts. You've got to understand, though, that SecDef, State of America are both behind the scenes dealing with this as well. So it's not just Mr. Trump and his thumb at 4 o'clock in the morning or something. What nobody's got yet is an answer to any of this. And, if you go back to last week when missiles were flying, a missile flew over Japan and their sirens went off and their public address system, which hasn't been used in that way for a long time, that must have been terrifying for them. North Korea knows what it's doing. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing and they're ramping it up themselves because it's for them, it's a means of negotiation. But the danger is, I don't think that we're going to see nuclear weapons raining back and forwards. But there could be some sort of accident, some sort of mistake, some sort of misunderstanding, and that's where the real danger would be.
The UN Security Council is meeting later on today. We'll keep across events at that here on Sky News. John, take us to the Mirror, and they're talking Brexit.
We're back at school again, and so the arguments at the playground are starting. Mr. Barnier, I mean, regardless of where you come down on the Brexit debate, if you want to really annoy people in Britain, it's being said, I'm going to teach you a lesson. It's rather like the schoolmaster in the schoolyard with a big stick in his hand. I'm going to make an example of somebody. And that's what Michel Barnier has actually said. We intend to teach people. We intend to teach people about the extreme serious consequences of exiting the single market. Basically what they're saying is, pour encouragez les autres, we are going to make an example out of you. Now, this is not going to go down well, regardless of which way you voted. Being told you're stupid, being told that you didn't understand, being told we're going to make an example to make sure nobody else goes down that route doesn't play well, and it's not going to help in the negotiations. But
how much of that do you think, Dalia, is public bravado? Because obviously the EU want to deter other countries from going, oh, look at the good deal that the UK are getting to leave the EU. But behind the scenes, behind closed doors, do you think negotiations are actually going better because there's the public front and then what happens that we don't know about?
Well, I mean, I would certainly hope so. I think that,
if it's not, we're in trouble.
Absolutely. I think, totally cutting off the line and making the relationship between the EU and Britain hostile is not in the interests of anyone, in terms of higher education funding, science, technology, tackling climate change. We really do need to work together. And I think on both sides, this kind of game of, bluffing and this public bravado that you mentioned, I don't think it's doing anyone any favours at all.
It's all getting a bit panto, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dalia, talk to me about the McDonald's strike. This is in The Guardian, because some of the staff are not loving their 0 hours contract, but McDonald's are hitting back and say, actually, I was going to say it's small fry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Get all the puns out, right? It's all out of my system. But in terms of how many workers it is, it's just 2 outlets in the UK, and they're going out on strike today.
Yeah, so I mean, it is just 2 outlets, but I think it's really important to notice this is the first strike of this kind since McDonald's opened in Britain in 1974. And what they're doing is they are campaigning against 0 hours contracts. And for people who don't know what 0 hours contracts are, basically that means that you don't have fixed working hours. Now, there's a very small number of workers that like that kind of flexibility. But I think for the majority of people who have families, who have caring responsibilities, or want to keep, social hours, that sort of doesn't really work. And what they're saying is that if we're going to have these kind of contracts, we want to have a living wage, we want to be on £10 an hour, and we want to have fixed working hours so we know when we're going to be working.
But you're saying that most people don't want 0 hours contracts, but McDonald's are saying that they've offered this to all their employees in the UK, and so far 86% had chosen to stay on these flexible contracts.
Well, I think there's a degree of flexibility. I think one of the stories in this article talks about how, someone went on holiday, they came back and they just had 1 shift a week instead of 5, and there was sort of no explanation. So I think there's definitely degrees of flexibility, and some work more in the interest of the worker, some work more in the interest of the boss. But I think if we are going to see the introduction of more 0 hours contracts, we also need to see the introduction of fair labour laws that work both in the interest of the worker and of the company. As this becomes more normalised, we need to also update our legislation and update our labour laws to move with the times.
There's quoting a worker called Steve who lives in Cambridge and works at McDonald's, says, I get about 35 hours a week, but even so, I can only afford to live because I get all my meals at McDonald's.
Exactly.
If you work for McDonald's, let us know what you think, news at sky.com, or drop me a tweet at Sky Sarah Jane. Let me know what you think about those 0 hour contracts. John, take me to the Mirror. Let kids go outside and play rather than watch TV.
Well, this is Spring Watcher's Chris Packham. Basically, there's a survey come out and it says 60% of parents would rather keep their children in the house rather than have to clean them up after they've been out playing. And basically what Chris is saying is that we're so worried about hygiene, about stranger danger, about not letting kids out of our sight, that kids are not going out and playing. They're not going out and enjoying themselves. They're not climbing up trees. They're not falling out of trees. And so, as an older chap, probably the oldest around this table, we would disappear during the school holidays, probably at 8 o'clock in the morning, and come back at about 5 o'clock.
But you paint a very idyllic picture there. Well, I just wonder how much of this is rose-tinted glasses, because not all children live in the countryside where they can run about in fields and there's lots of green open spaces for them to climb trees. A lot of them live in cities, in towns where there isn't much park space. They'd have to kick a football about on the road, and it isn't actually that safe.
Well, I didn't live in the countryside. I lived in an estate in the northeast, but you went outside and you kicked a ball around in the street. I accept that these days probably that's not everybody can do that, but there is this cosseted environment where kids sit either watching TV or on their iPads or on their phones. And he's just saying that, do you know what? Getting out and about, getting dirty is going to be okay. As long as you're aware, I guess, of that stranger danger. Is it as real as perhaps we think it is, that kind of stranger danger, those risks? Or is that something what's the opposite of rose-tinted spectacles? I mean, is that something that, is that more in our minds than it should be, in actual fact?
Okay. Well, let us know what you think, news at sky.com. Kids back to school this week and students off to university. We're going to be talking about Freshers Week after the break with John and Dalia. Stay with us. Dalia and John continuing our look through Monday's newspapers. And we're going to start, Dalia, with a story that you found in the Times. A lot of new students off to university, enjoying Freshers Week in the coming days. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, it seems.
Yes, so what we're seeing now is the number of first-year students who disclose a mental illness when arriving at university has risen 5-fold. And I think what this really tells us is that we need a really serious and well-resourced approach to mental health. I think a lot of the time universities try to go for these kind of quite fluffy solutions like, more bikes on campus. But I think what we really need is good funding into mental health services. University is a place where a lot of people learn a lot of the life skills that will stick with them for life. Yeah. And things like identifying the signs of anxiety and depression and knowing how to deal with them and developing those kinds of coping strategies is a really important part of that will stick with you for life. And so, we're seeing particularly a large proportion of women who are coming forward, and I don't know if that's because men feel a bit of stigma coming forward with mental health issues, or whether women are having different experiences of university. But what we're seeing is that the conversation is not nearly where it needs to be at the moment.
I mean, John, going to university is a big life-changing experience for those who go, because often it's the first time they've lived away from home. They are going to a new city. They don't have any friends. They then have to study. It's, there's all of this going on, which can put a lot of pressure on you. And if you do have underlying mental health issues that you don't know about, where do you go? Who do you turn
it puts
to?
such a huge change in your life, especially, at 18, you probably haven't seen as much and done as much, perhaps, as in the past. And then you are off in a strange city. The tragedy about that story, I think, is that it's when they're going to university that they're talking about it.
Yeah.
As you say, they should have been talking about it 2 years before, when they were starting doing their A-levels and they were really worried about results and everything else.
I'm going to talk about breakfast now. And John, you found this in the Times.
Well,
anybody who has a croissant for breakfast will know that you don't actually get value for money, because most of it ends up down your front and in your lap, because they're quite flaky.
And you can't cut them. If you want to make, a ham and cheese croissant, it's really difficult to get in the middle. This is an ongoing story, Sarah Jane. So we've had the cronut, which is a croissant and a donut. We've had the Kregel, which is the Dagel, which is a donut and a bagel.
Oh, wow.
So now what Asda's come up with is the Kroll. And so this is a croissant.
Doesn't sound particularly appetising.
No, it's better. It's the croissant and a roll. So it's like the croissant with a flakiness, but designed like a roll with a bit more flour in it, so you can cut it and you can put your ham and cheese in it, so you can have a croissant-flavoured ham and cheese sandwich. As some wags on social media have pointed out, up north, where I'm from, they call them the BAP.
Yeah, crusty roll. Yeah.
But you can't have a croissant and a BAP put together in a name.
Oh, it's all too much fuss for me this morning. I'll just have some toast, I think. Right, OK, that's all we've got time for. Dalia, John, thank you very much. We'll have more stories from inside Monday morning's papers after 7 o'clock for you. In the meantime, we're going to get a check on the weather with Nazanin. There you go. Right, with us to take a look through your Monday newspapers, we have the environmentalist Dalia Gebrial and the author John Nichol. Welcome back both. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you on your Star Wars knowledge. You're both looking very nervous during that. We'll leave that to Jonathan. He's swatting up as we speak, and I'm sure you'll get in touch with him at Jonathan Samuels with some Star Wars facts. But we are going to go to the front page of The Guardian, Dalia. And a really interesting report they've got. It's their lead story. There's been an inquiry to prevent deaths in police custody. It's had some interesting findings.
Yes, so we often think of, police brutality or sort of issues when it comes to community and police relations as an American problem. But actually what this report reveals is that we are seeing a breakdown in trust between community and police in the UK as well. Over 1,000 people have died in police custody since 1990, and there have been no convictions or anyone sort of held accountable for that. I think that
1,000 people dying in police custody.
Yes.
Yeah, but not all, some of them are death from natural causes. I think we just need to be slightly careful about using these figures in that way, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think that what the main issue is that the lack of transparency and the lack of investigation means that we don't have that further detail on actually how and why those people died. And what this report is calling for, amongst many things, is better training on mental health for police officers, an end to detaining people who have mental health issues in prison, and also for installing video cameras in every police van, again, to help improve transparency and trust. Ultimately, a fair justice system needs an accountable police force, and I think that this report is a really good step in the right direction.
Well, I think that the police have got to be accountable. I think we do really need to be careful that, especially when we talk about police, the police are picking up the pieces all over the country, and I think we need to be really careful about hammering them because of a couple of incidents. I'm not saying that for those who are involved that it's not a tragedy, but if you go out with the police on a Saturday and a Friday night, and I have on a number of occasions, they are dealing with the mess of society, and we can't just put all of this onto the police shoulders. Where I know a load of coppers, and not one of them is brutal. Not one of them is violent, not one of them is corrupt. They are all good, honest, decent men and women trying to do a really difficult job in nigh on impossible.
But it's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, Dalia, when they talk about better training for police to deal with people they encounter with mental health issues. Is that really for the police to deal with? Surely that should cast a spotlight on the failings of our health service and not having enough mental health facilities, because the police are the people
they're the ones that go and pick it off the street, literally at the end of the
there's no other option. Okay, let's go to the Times, John. This is about organ donation. Are you an organ donor? Do you carry a card?
I've carried a card for 35 years since I was, was allowed to carry one.
And have you had a conversation with your family about that's what you want?
It's written in my will. My wife knows that there'll be no funeral for John Nichol. There'll be no body. There'll be nothing, because everything is going. Every organ that they want, and they may not want any by the time I die, is going, and then my body's going to science as well.
Because this is one of our stories. I mean, the Times are illustrating the point that hundreds are left to die because families don't know of their loved ones' wishes. Dalia, have you had that conversation with your family? Because that's what they're saying here. People aren't talking about it. So in that moment, when you've just lost a loved one, to be asked if you want to donate their organs, most people will say no because they're in shock.
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable time. I actually had no idea, because I'm an organ donor as well, and I had no idea that your family could revoke or change that. I think that's really sort of strange and quite surprising. Yeah, and I think also I've seen a lot of research that shows that when you have an opt-in situation, a lot more people sign up, because actually the vast majority of people, if they sit down and think about it, would be happy to donate their organs.
About talking about it, but I do believe that we should have an opt-in system, in that, an opt-out system, in that you have to say, I do not want my organs to be used. So there is a presume that you will have your organs used, because of those 460 people a year whose family said, no, you can't have them, about the same number died because of the lack of organs. And I think most people would want it, unless it's for religious beliefs, which is understandable.
OK, well, let us know what you think. news@sky.com. Dalia, take me to the newspaper. Is the party over for young people in Ibiza?
Well, I mean, it looks like Ibiza residents no longer have to deal with the notorious British boozy teenagers. It's now become more of a sort of luxury holiday destination, because it's become a bit too expensive for teenagers who are kind of going to places like Zante and Kos, and now sort of people in their 30s are looking for a kind of more chilled out holiday. I have to say, I personally prefer lying on the beach in Marseille, which I did last week.
As opposed to raving in Ibiza.
Yeah, no, it's not really, I don't have I feel like I'm an old soul, you know.
No. If you do go to Ibiza, the mind does boggle how young people, teenagers, can afford it, because to get into a nightclub in Ibiza can cost, 80 euros.
Yeah.
A bottle of water can cost anywhere between 5 and 10 euros. When I was an 18-year-old, there's no way I could afford that.
But they are spending an astonishing
amount of money. Probably, for most people.
They're spending an astonishing amount of money at these places. It is my vision of hell. Standing in a crowd of semi-naked people.
Look, John, they're not going anymore. The young'uns, the semi-naked ones aren't going anymore. It's just for the old
semi-naked 53-year-olds.
Oh, dear, right. Before we get on to that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll have more stories from inside today's papers for you coming up after that. Continuing our look through today's papers, Dalia and John. And John, you have picked up the creepiest story in the Daily Mail. What is this all about?
Well, this is, how you have bollards to stop people parking on the pavement, etc.
Yeah.
Concrete ones or metal ones. Well, in Iver, Buckinghamshire, next to Iver Infants and Junior School, the council has spent just over £5,000 on 2 child-shaped ones. Now, at first you think, what a waste of money, but in actual fact, I reckon that is going to stop you parking on the pavement, or will actually force you to slow down, because people will think that it's a child trying to cross the road. But all that needs to happen here, so Alison Major, who lives nearby, said, they look awful, they should have been a normal traffic bollard, they will be knocked over in no time. If people are knocking them over, they need to learn to drive then, don't they? Isn't that the point? You shouldn't need a child-shaped bollard to make you drive properly. And what you also shouldn't have is people, as you can see in the top right-hand corner of the picture, going out on social media and putting sun cream on them. Or glasses,
I think
wigs.
They're taking the mick. They're not the most attractive, are they?
They look like something from an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah, OK, exactly. And they've cost the parish council nearly £6,000. Yeah.
There's a talking point.
They're giving me the creeps a little bit. Right, we're going to talk about... Oh, I've just lost my list.
It's the cat.
Oh, the cat. Here we go. The cats in Downing Street are having a spat.
Yeah, I mean, as if, Number 10 didn't have enough problems with Theresa May's election and, getting told off by the EU. The cat's being upstaged by the Foreign Office cat, who has caught more mice And
This
is
is
sort of a lot more...
Palmerston, who is the resident
Yes.
cat at the Foreign Office.
Yeah, he's been catching more mice, he's been running around, catching all the limelight. And, you know, I just hope that with all the Brexit negotiations coming up, that killer instinct will be matched inside behind the doors
Very
as well.
good. He's caught 27 mice. This is under a Freedom of Information Act. Somebody's got a bit too much time on their hands. He's got 27 mice since his arrival in Westminster since just over a year ago. And I don't know if anybody follows the number 10 cat on Twitter, but the number 10 cat is not happy about this. He's calling the lawyers in because he doesn't believe these figures.
Well, Larry, I was going to say, Larry the cat at number 10 can rest easy because the Foreign Office said this figure, the 27 mice figure, is likely to be much higher as these are only reported sightings, but they could also be far less, maybe. Who knows? Right, OK. Dalia, John, thank you very much for your company this morning. You'll be back after 8 o'clock to talk about some of the big stories we're discussing throughout the day here on Sky News. In the meantime, we're going to take a look at the weather with Nazanin. Now here with their take on some of the big stories we'll be covering throughout the day here on Sky News. John and Dalia return. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the breaking news that's been happening. South Korean media, John, saying that North Korea appears to be preparing for another missile launch, and this could be an intercontinental ballistic missile. It, of course, follows the nuclear test we saw yesterday.
And this is where the problems start, in that I don't think that North Korea is not stupid. It is not going to want some sort of all-out war. It knows that if it launches anything against Guam or against South Korea or Japan, or God forbid against the mainland United States, it will be destroyed. Its nation will be destroyed. Its leadership, all of those people that you see there will be killed, they'll be destroyed. I don't think they want to do that, but they're clever and they're ramping up the pressure. And the problem with ramping up the pressure on both sides is that you have a mistake, you have a miscalculation, you have a misunderstanding about what's happening. There was always the great fear in the Cold War in the 60s and the 70s that something would happen because of a mistake, and that's the real problem. So when it's reported they are loading a missile, that, you know, you can just imagine the alarm bells going off in various defence headquarters.
Yeah, Dalia, you do wonder where this is going to lead, because while North Korea remains unchecked, the rest of the region, they're not just going to sit on their hands while North Korea builds this nuclear arsenal. It could lead to a bit of a nuclear arms race in that region. And like John said, that's where mistakes happen.
I mean, it's absolutely disastrous from all ends. And I think, you know, it's not unusual for North Korea to sort of make these kinds of threats. They're known for being a bit, you know, full of lots of words, full of hot air. But this is sort of the first time that the US has mirrored that rhetoric quite so explicitly. And I think that that's sort of particularly irresponsible and is, you know, putting the whole region and the wider world at threat.
And John, North Korea do not want to sit down and talk. So direct talks with the United States, for example, they're saying absolutely not, we won't be doing that. Although, you know, Donald Trump has suggested in the past that could be an option. And if diplomatically nothing can be done, you do wonder what the options are, really.
I think that diplomatically behind the scenes, I am presuming that messages are going back and forwards and that discussions are happening.
We're looking at China, aren't we, really?
Yeah.
Because 90% of North Korea's trade is with China, and North Korea apparently has 6 months' oil supply left.
And China does not want any sort of disaster in North Korea because of the destabilization of the region. So China doesn't want that either. North Korea, they're not stupid in North Korea, despite what we may think, despite what we may laugh. We need to try to, we're using our notions of what we think is the right and the wrong way to go about things and putting them on them. That's not how they think. They're using all of this as a negotiating stance to get what they want, to get influence about what they want, to get their position in the world stabilised. And you have to think like that rather than just say, you can't do it this way.
More on the situation with regard to North Korea throughout the day here on Sky News. We're going to talk about a story on the front page of The Times now. Dalia, interested to get your point of view on this. This is Theresa May apparently reining in Tory rebels with fear of a reshuffle, because all the talk over the weekend, Dalia, has been about Theresa May losing grip on her government.
Yeah, I think, you know, ever since the election, she's sort of been in quite a precarious position. And I think these kind of threats, this kind of centralisation of control in the Tory party is something that has caused her a lot of problems in the past. And I think this is really just it might work in the short term, but I think in the terms of the long-term health of the party, I think that this is not really the best way for her to go. And I think it kind of signals that she's feeling very weak and she's feeling very vulnerable at the moment.
Vulnerable from those Tory rebels, John, who, when she made that announcement that she's in it for the long term and she will be leading the Conservatives to the next election in 2022, a lot of them said, you're joking, aren't you?
But the thing is, there's no other answer to that question, Sarah Jane. If you ask a Prime Minister, are you going to stay? They can't say, yeah. We saw that with Mr Cameron and with Tony Blair as well. You know, if you say, I'm going in 2 years, that starts the race.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I have to, I'm really interested in this story because she's got no negotiating power. She can't rein anybody in because her majority is so minuscule that it's only going to take half a dozen people to walk away and vote on the other side of the argument, and it'll bring the government down. So I do wonder about the exactitude of this story, but she is in a precarious position. And who would have thought, when we were sitting here 6-7 months ago talking about a Tory landslide and the fact that Labour Party was going into oblivion and was going to split, how the world has changed, the country has changed in just a few months.
But it's interesting, Dalia, I did spot a story in one of the papers, I can't remember what paper it was in now, but they were saying an alternative to Theresa May to lead the Conservatives. They're not too sure who the options are. And the same for Labour as well, in terms of you've got May and you've got Corbyn. Look beyond them. There probably isn't a realistic candidate for either party.
Yes, not at all. And I think that, you know, whilst the last election really did improve confidence in Jeremy Corbyn and in the team around him because they did much better than expected, it really did weaken Theresa May's position. And I think it exposed a lot of the internal divisions within the party, and that kind of strong and stable narrative that she tried to push forward was really shown up quite dramatically. But you're completely right. I think that the Tories are suffering from a real lack of leadership, their lack of direction. And when it comes to Brexit in particular, you know, we've seen Labour has come out with quite a detailed plan for a transitional period, whatever you think about it. Whereas the Tories are sticking to sort of empty phrases like red, white and blue Brexit. But what does that mean for jobs? What does that mean for healthcare? What does it mean for, you know, tackling climate change? We're not really very sure.
People are desperate for detail and at this stage not getting it. The other main political challenge for the Prime Minister is in Northern Ireland, which for the first time in a decade is facing the very real possibility of direct rule from Westminster. Northern Ireland Secretary James Brokenshire will be meeting party leaders in Belfast later today. Our Ireland correspondent David Blevins is there for us. And David, what is the Northern Ireland Secretary hoping to achieve from this meeting today?
Well, it's 9 months since the devolved government here in Northern Ireland collapsed, and 6 months since the Northern Ireland Assembly election. And if the parties have been unable to reach political agreement in that time, I think there's very little prospect of James Brokenshire being able to persuade them today to do so. It's not just a question of them finding the right mechanism, because we heard last week Arlene Foster float the idea of them resuming power sharing and establishing another process alongside that to deal with outstanding differences. It's a question of whether or not James Brokenshire can find the political will among the parties, given the different context we have now here around Brexit and the DUP influence at Westminster, two things which have dramatically changed the political landscape.
And just talk to me about public services. How bad is the situation likely to get, given what's going on there today?
Well, when you have no functioning government for 8 or 9 months, you can just imagine no minister at the helm of any department, and services like health and education, infrastructure, finance, all of those things begin to seriously unravel. James Brokenshire did manage in July to allocate some funds, but we're now halfway through the financial year without the civil servants who are effectively running Northern Ireland knowing how much money they have to spend. They're already dealing with enormous cutbacks in health and education, and now they've no minister in office to decide how what money there is available should be allocated. And remember, ironically, there is an extra £1.5 billion in the dormant bank account. That's what Theresa May paid for the DUP support at Westminster. But if there's no devolved government here, it won't be local ministers allocating that cash. It will be direct rule ministers from Westminster.
OK, David Blevins, thank you. David Blevins in Belfast for us this morning across the situation there. Let's return to our panel, and we're talking about a strike by McDonald's workers, the first of its kind in the UK. It's already trending on Twitter this morning, #McStrike. And this is all over pay and working conditions, Dalia.
Yes, so what we're seeing is two branches in South London are partaking in McDonald's first ever strike in the UK, so it's quite momentous. And it's all on 0 hours contracts, on having a livable wage, and also there have been a lot of reports of harassment and bullying from management, so it's trying to sort of put an end to that. And I think, we really should not be living in a world where in-work poverty is at its highest rate ever. If you are working 35 hours a week, you should be able to put a roof over your head, you should be able to eat, nutritiously and live a decent life. And that's what we're not seeing, not just in McDonald's, but across the service sector. But I also think one angle that we're not hearing very often now is it's not just about wages. We actually need a holistic look at why is it so expensive to live, particularly in the cities. Things like, rent is sky high. The cost of living is way beyond what most people are earning. So we really need a holistic look at actually how can we make it so that people who are working hard, who are working 35-hour weeks, are able to live a decent and dignified life.
And the two branches that are striking, John, are in Cambridge and in South East London, two areas of the country where it is particularly expensive to live. And some of the case studies that are in the newspapers today, you hear of workers having to sleep on a mattress on a floor in a shared house, saying it's a choice between eating and paying rent. But McDonald's are saying 86% of its staff took up the option to have these flexible 0 hours contracts.
And this is one of the problems with this whole thing. So, I mean, everything that Dalia says is absolutely true. If it's not just McDonald's workers, if you're a firefighter or a nurse or a teacher, the chances of you buying a house either in Cambridge or in South East London are slim to absolutely minimal. But there are people who want to work like that. And I think a lot of the people who are working, I don't want to be McDonald's spokesman here, but I do feel, they have said 86% of their employees want to stay on these 0 hour contracts. Well, if that's the case, if those figures are true, and I don't know if McDonald's are adding a little bit of salt and pepper to their figures or anything like that, but if they want to be on them, some people do like them. That said, if you're a family person, if you've got a family or kids at school, you can't possibly work on a basis where you have to queue up to get work. That's what happened in the 1920s in the shipyards in the northeast. You had to queue up to get work on a daily basis, and we can't have that.
OK, John, Dalia, thank you very much. We'll have more after the break here on Sunrise. We're going to be asking you, what's the biggest round you've ever got in? Now, I always time it wrong when I arrive at a pub to meet friends. I always time it when everybody needs a drink. So you get there and you go, does anyone need a drink? All the hands go up. So it seems similar to this in the south of Germany. This is Oliver Strumpfel. He has broken the world record for getting the biggest round in. He's carrying more than 29 beer jugs. And to break that record, he had to get it from the bar to his mates without spilling any more than 10% of that beer. Does he manage to do it?
The most amazing thing is that it's
Yes,
69 kilos. So that's nearly my weight. I mean, 69
I thought you were about to say that's nearly how much you drink in a weekend.
No, my goodness, 69 kilos. But I don't know if you've ever been to an Oktoberfest or a beer festival, but I'm particularly partial to a bit of leather shorts and thigh slapping. And they are...
What about the beer fest?
No, about the beer fest. They are great occasions to go to.
OK, well, that's what John gets up to at the weekend. Dalia, I take it you get a smaller round in, more ladylike round.
I mean, someone clearly was paying attention in university, this guy. I think that, I could have done with this when I was a waitress, because I was notoriously bad at carrying things and just always had my head in the clouds and was dropping things all over the place. So I could have done with some of those skills.
You need to watch Oliver in action if you are waiting tables this week, because that is some skills indeed. 31 of those beer tankers, each holding a litre of beer. Whew, there you go. Right, Dalia, John,
cheers.
Pleasure to have your company with us this morning. We're going to take a look at the weather now with Nazanin, who's always the first to get around in.